Today I'd like to share a fun build I've been cooking up recently where I'm taking the best of both worlds from Void and Solar. For Void, I'm taking volatile rounds to just spread it across enemy waves, and then for Solar, I'm taking ignitions to blow them all up, all in one build. Now for today, I am using Prismatic Hunter, and I am going to utilize an exotic class item for this build, but I do want to state that you don't need to run an exotic class item for this build. You could run the standalone exotic version instead. Speaking of which, let's talk about the exotic perks. The exotic class item I am rocking today features Spirit of Gerfalcon. This is going to be the entire engine of the build, and this is why I mentioned that you don't have to run an exotic class item. You can just rock the actual OG Gerfalcons and still run the build if you'd like. For the second perk, you have a couple of options. You could rock Spirit of Caliban, you could go with Spirit of Assassin for additional invis, you can rock Foe Tracer, you can try to do Galanor if you'd like, or you can go with the obvious choice if you happen to have it, which is going to be Spirit of Inmost Light. My top two picks, though, are definitely going to be Spirit of Inmost Light and then Spirit of Caliban in that order. The reason why I'm not recommending Galanor specifically here is if you're running Tether like I am in my build, it seems like Galanor is bugged with Tether for some reason. I've had waves of like 10 plus enemies where I tether them perfectly on my own with nobody else around me, and I just don't get any super energy back. So it seems like it's bugged or super inconsistent. So currently, I wouldn't recommend running Galanor with this build. But if you're using a different super, I suppose, instead of Tether, you probably could. Other than that, I would stick with Inmost or Caliban. If you don't have those, then you go down the list to things like Foe Tracer. Now let's go over the kit. So as I already mentioned, my super for this is going to be Tether, since the build is all about control and then making everything explode in that controlled zone. Tether is perfect for this, plus, you know, the damage, or rather the debuff of Tether. Then in our melee, we have Snare Bomb, kind of similar to Tether. It gives you a weaken on an enemy, thus you do more damage, but also provides a way for us to go invisible. Once you land your Snare Bomb on an enemy, then you kill that enemy, you will instantly go invis, and then that'll proc Gerfalcons for when you come out of invisibility. In my grenade slot, I imagine most people would go with Dustfield in this, but for my build, I'm actually going with Grapple for a couple of different reasons. First, if you're rocking the Spirit of Caliban's variant that I mentioned earlier, your Grapple, despite being a grenade slot ability, actually still counts as a melee once you grapple towards something. So, you grapple towards a pack of enemies, let's say you kill a Thrall, that Thrall will die, then it'll proc Spirit of Caliban since it's technically a melee, and everything else will explode around that dead Thrall. Another reason to run this is once your grapple is done and things have exploded around you, you will proc Stylish Executioner, which means you will go invisible and thus have a free exit point with no risk involved. Now for the cherry on top, while this is all happening, and let's say you just killed a pack of enemies with this grapple combo, your other aspect will also now activate, which is going to be Gunpowder Gamble. For those of you that are unfamiliar with GPG, it states defeating targets with abilities, elemental debuff damage, or solar weapons will charge up an improved solar explosion. Basically, this is an ignition. So, if you properly get a pack of enemies killed with just your one grapple combo, you will have a free GPG loaded and ready to go for anywhere to throw with this build and make an explosion through an ignition. But that's not the only way we're going to proc GPG, because remember, this is also a volatile build, and volatile rounds will also build up your GPG to be ready very quickly. Now, before moving on to fragments, let's talk about the gear of the build and what makes this so synergistic. Specifically, I'm talking about the weapons. In my kinetic slot, I have one of the MVPs of the show here, which is Tanasha's Mastery, the recent sidearm released in Iron Banner, which is a stasis rocket sidearm. The main purpose of this is going to be Chill Clip. This perk is massive for this build. You don't need any other perk on this weapon, by the way. As long as you have a Chill Clip version of this weapon, you are golden. What happens here is when I just shoot one single enemy with Chill Clip and I slow them, I will then instantly go invis. This is just ridiculous how easy it is to get your engine going with this weapon. I shoot a Dreg, they get slowed and then die, I go invisible, bam, I have volatile rounds ready to go on demand. And for the other MVP in this build, the heavy slot, we're going with Retrofit Escapade. Retrofit is bar none the best void machine gun in the game, and yes, that includes Commemoration. Fight me behind Walmart if you disagree. Anyway, it has the great unique combination of having 4 times the charm and target lock as the roll on it. Now, normally, target lock wouldn't matter in case of hordes of enemies where you're just going to proc volatile rounds and just make all of them explode anyway. But in the event that you're fighting, let's say, a yellow bar or a champion or maybe like an onslaught boss, you can actually utilize 4 times the charm and target lock to get some good damage in without just throwing away all of your ammo instantly. And lastly, that leaves us with the energy slot. Now, this one is up to your player preference, depending on which weapons that you have. For example, you could go with Buried Bloodline if you happen to have it, and then this way you can proc Buried Bloodline to give you Devour. Thus, you can have Devour and infinite volatile rounds on command the entire time, so when you kill one single enemy with any of your volatile or ignition procs, you will instantly get healed by Devour, and you can keep it up the whole time as long as there's enemies spawning. If you don't have Buried Bloodline, a great replacement is going to be Graviton Lance. Not only is Graviton basically baby retrofit, but you can use this as your main source of volatile rounds if you happen to run out of ammo with retrofit, and additionally, since it's a exotic primary, you can actually try to get heavy ammo back by using this for a little bit on a couple of waves of enemies. Speaking of heavy ammo, let's go back to Tenacious Mastery for a second. Now, assuming you have this weapon and you've enhanced it, you can then use the Heavy Ammo Finder Enhancement Weapon mod, and then when you go for a kill to proc your slow on an enemy to give you invisibility, you also will have a chance to proc this and get a heavy ammo drop on the floor for your retrofit if you happen to need it. Now let's get into the fragments. We have 5 fragments from left to right. First, we have Facet of Ruin. This increases the area of effect for your solar ignition. So your GPG ignition or your grapple ignition, assuming you're running Spirit of Caliban, this will just make it a wider radius to kill everything. That's followed up by Facet of Protection. When you're surrounded by commands, like let's say when you're using a grapple going into a wave of enemies, you're more resistant to incoming damage, and when you're transcended, the effect is increased, so just more DR. In the third slot, we have Facet of Balance. Rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy. Rapidly defeating targets with darkness damage grants grenade energy. This is pretty straightforward. You have multiple ways to utilize both light and dark damage to get your energy back for your melee and your grenade slots, so it just helps you regen your abilities faster. Next is Facet of Dawn. Powered melee hits against targets makes you radiant. Pretty straightforward. You throw your smoke bomb on an enemy, you weaken them, and thus you become radiant because it is a melee, so you do more damage with your weapons. And honestly, this probably works with grapple too because, again, it counts as a melee technically, so there's that. For our last fragment slot, you can actually put whatever you want here. Maybe you want to go with Purpose, maybe you want to go with Courage. I personally currently have Facet of Blessing, which states melee final blows start health regeneration. So basically, I go with my grapple into a wave of enemies, I kill something, I go invisible, and also if something was shooting me during that time, I will also then get healed from my melee kill. So that's the kit. The core concept of the build is to get invisible as fast as humanly possible. Particularly, you start off with Tenacious, get a slow, kill that enemy, instantly go invisible, and then you start popping off with volatile rounds. As you're doing your volatile round spamming, you will get procs for your GPG. You could throw that, pop an ignition. If you see a wave of enemies spawning, you could go grapple into them, get health back, go invis, make an ignition again, and then continue on with your volatile round explosions because Stylish Executioner is just going to keep proccing over and over and over again. Let's wrap up with armor mods. Right off the bat, I'll tell you, for artifact mods, you don't really need anything. You could put in something like Curative Orbs for when you're popping shields to get orbs, but really that's about it. Maybe next episode in Heresy it'll be more void focused. But for my armor mods, here we go. In helmet, we have Heavy Ammo Finder, and then 1 copy of Void Siphon. Pretty straightforward and standard. In my gloves, I have 1 copy of Firepower, because, again, our grapple is a grenade ability, so it should make an orb when you get a grapple kill. Then 1 copy of Heavy Handed, because it also counts as a melee for whatever reason. So, again, you'd make an orb off of that. And then, finally, Focusing Strike. Grants class ability energy when you cause damage with a powered melee attack, just to get our dodge back, because our dodge is, by the way, reload dodge, so every time you run out of ammo with retrofit, you just use your dodge to get more ammo back and keep going with your volatile explosions. For my chest, pretty standard. We have 1 copy of Arc Resist, 1 copy of Solar Resist, and then 1 copy of Void Reserves. But if you're doing endgame content where there's a ton of Void enemies, you can swap this out for a Void Resist if you need it. In boots, we've got 1 copy of Recuperation, replenishes health when you pick up an Aura of Power, which will be pretty common. 1 copy of a Void Weapon Surge for our retrofit and maybe Graviton if you're running that. And then 1 copy of Absolution to reduce all ability cooldowns each time you pick up an Aura of Power. And lastly, our class item, 1 copy of Outreach to reduce melee cooldown when using your class ability when you're dodging. 1 copy of Powerful Attraction for when you are dodging to reload, you will scoop up all the orbs around you and get your super faster, and also get, recuperation and all of that. And finally, Distribution, reduce all ability cooldowns when using your class ability near targets, which will be pretty common. And that is the build. It's a solid contender to be ran in any content that has solid add density or just wave-based content. If I can run this in Expert Onslaught, which goes up to 2065 in power, then I can run it basically anywhere else in the game that has lots of enemy waves. But with that said, I will leave the dim link below in case any of you guys want to try the build on your own. But in the meantime, let me know what you think, and if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing today. It does help the channel grow and is much appreciated. And if you want to go the extra mile, you could leave a like and or a comment below as well. If you don't know what to leave as a comment, you can leave Volatile Ignitions as the comment. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.